You think you know Coors? Let me tell you what you don't know. You don't know about the founder's mysterious suicide just months before the Great Depression shattered America. You don't know about the brilliant, Fulbright scholar-turned-murderer who kidnapped the family's heir and left him for dead on a frozen mountainside. And you definitely don't know how that single murder pushed a family of brewers to become the powerful architects of the modern conservative movement, using their beer money to fund a political revolution that would spark decades of furious boycotts from unions, civil rights groups, and nearly every minority community in the country. The story of Coors isn't about beer. It's about how a family tragedy reshaped American politics. It's about a dynasty that built a fortress of wealth, only to find themselves trapped inside with their own ghosts. Forget the commercials. This is the real story. The dynasty begins with one man, Adolph Coors Sr. He was a quintessential underdog, an orphan from industrial Prussia who fled military conscription in 1868. Arriving in America with nothing but an expert knowledge of brewing, he spent years honing his craft before setting his sights on the raw opportunity of the American West. In 1872, he found his destiny in a small Colorado town called Golden. It had everything he needed: thirsty gold miners, and most importantly, the pure, pristine water of the Rocky Mountains. On the banks of Clear Creek, he established his brewery in 1873. Through sheer force of will and a fanatical devotion to quality, his Golden Lager became a regional sensation, and Adolph became the sole master of his burgeoning empire. He was the living embodiment of the American dream, but a storm was gathering that would threaten to destroy it all: prohibition. While other breweries died, Coors survived with remarkable ingenuity. When the country outlawed alcohol, they pivoted, turning their facilities into a highly profitable ceramics factory, producing everything from dinnerware to scientific equipment. This brilliant move not only saved the company but made it stronger. When Prohibition was finally repealed in 1933, Coors was ready to dominate. But the patriarch who built it all would not see that day. In June 1929, just months before the stock market crash, the 82-year-old Adolph Coors Sr. died after falling from a 6-story hotel window in Virginia Beach. His death was officially ruled a probable suicide, though the family has always maintained it could have been an accidental fall. It was a tragic, violent end that cast the first long, dark shadow over the dynasty he had built, a chilling prologue to the tragedies that would follow. With the patriarch gone, the mantle of leadership fell to his eldest son, Adolph Coors Jr. He was a different man from his gruff, self-made father. Educated at the prestigious Cornell University, Adolph Jr. was more polished, more worldly, a man comfortable in boardrooms and society circles. But beneath the refined exterior beat the same heart of iron will and shrewd business instinct that had defined his father. He, along with his brothers Grover and William, inherited an empire at one of the most challenging moments in American history. The Roaring Twenties had come to a screeching halt, and the Great Depression was tightening its suffocating grip on the nation. Yet for the Coors Company, this moment of national crisis was fused with an incredible opportunity: the repeal of Prohibition in 1933. Adolph Jr. seized it with both hands. While other companies were contracting, laying off workers, and shutting down, Coors did the opposite. Thanks to the immense profitability of the Coors Porcelain Company, the family had a deep well of capital to draw from. They had also meticulously maintained their brewing equipment throughout the dry years. On April 7th, 1933, the day beer became legal again. Coors was ready. A train loaded with 150,000 gallons of Coors beer pulled out of Golden, destined for Denver, greeted by cheering crowds. The brewery became a beacon of economic hope in a state ravaged by unemployment. Throughout the Depression, the Coors Brewery and the porcelain factory were major employers, providing stable, well-paying jobs when they were desperately scarce. Adolph Jr. became a respected figure, a captain of industry who not only survived the storm, but steered his community through it. The 1940s and 50s were a period of meteoric yet meticulously controlled growth. The post-World War II economic boom created a thirsty and prosperous middle class, and Coors was perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. Under Adolph Jr.'s leadership, the company cultivated a mystique that few brands in history have ever achieved. The key to this mystique was a deliberate, almost stubborn strategy of scarcity. Coors beer was not and would not be available nationwide. For decades, its official distribution was restricted to just 11 Western states. This wasn't initially a clever marketing ploy. It was born of a production necessity that became a legendary part of their brand identity. The Coors family held an almost religious belief that their beer's unique taste came from two things: the pure, unadulterated Rocky Mountain spring water and their refusal to pasteurize the final product. Pasteurization, a heating process used by most national brewers to kill bacteria and prolong shelf life, was seen as a cardinal sin in the Golden Brewery. Adolph Jr. and his sons believed it compromised the crisp, clean flavor of their beer. They called it cooking the beer, and they would not do it. This commitment to quality created a massive logistical challenge. An unpasteurized beer is a delicate product, vulnerable to spoiling if it gets warm. To protect their banquet beer, Coors had to ensure it was kept cold from the moment it left the brewery until it was poured into a glass. They invested millions in building a state-of-the-art cold chain, a fleet of refrigerated trucks, and specially insulated rail cars. This was an incredibly expensive and complex undertaking, and it was the primary reason they limited their distribution. They simply couldn't guarantee the beer's quality over the long distances to the East Coast. But this practical limitation created an extraordinary and unintended marketing effect. Coors became a forbidden fruit, a regional delicacy that the rest of the country craved. An aura of exclusivity and mystique grew around the brand. It was the beer you couldn't get. This scarcity turned it into a status symbol. People would make cross-country beer runs to Colorado, Utah, or Arizona, loading up the trunks of their cars with cases of Coors to bring back east like precious cargo. A black market for the beer thrived. Celebrities like Paul Newman and Clint Eastwood were famously devoted fans, often having cases specially flown to their movie sets. Stories circulated that President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Colorado native, occasionally had Coors shipped to him in Washington, though this remains anecdotal rather than documented fact. Coors wasn't just a beverage, it was a cult, a symbol of the rugged, independent, and slightly unobtainable West. The innovation didn't stop with distribution. As Adolph Jr. grew older, the third generation of the family was coming of age and taking on critical roles in the company, each according to his unique talents. The three brothers who would shape the company's destiny were a study in contrast. There was Adolph Coors III, the eldest. Known as Ad, he was the handsome, charismatic, and universally well-liked heir apparent, groomed from birth to one day lead the entire enterprise. He was the public face of the company, the smooth diplomat. Then there was William Bill Coors. Bill was the introverted technical genius of the family, a brilliant chemical engineer with a degree from Princeton University. He was a man who preferred the laboratory and the factory floor to the boardroom. He was obsessed with efficiency, quality control, and innovation. Finally, there was Joseph Joe Coors Sr., the youngest of the three. Joe was the hard-nosed, aggressive business strategist and increasingly the family's political ideologue. If Ad was the velvet glove, Joe was the iron fist. He was fiercely competitive, deeply conservative, and possessed a razor-sharp mind for finance and strategy. It was Bill, the quiet genius, who spearheaded one of the company's most significant and lasting innovations. For years, the industry standard for beer cans was a three-piece tin-plated steel can that was heavy, prone to rust, and often imparted a metallic taste to the beer. Bill believed there was a better way. He became fascinated with aluminum, a metal that was lightweight, rust-proof, and didn't affect the flavor of its contents. After years of research and development, in 1959, Coors shocked the industry by introducing the two-piece seamless aluminum beer can. It was a revolution. The can was lighter, which drastically reduced shipping costs. It chilled much faster than steel, and most importantly, it preserved the beer's taste exactly as the brewers intended. But the innovation didn't stop there. Bill Coors was also concerned about the environmental impact of millions of disposable cans littering the landscape. In a move that was decades ahead of its time, Coors launched Cash for Cans, the nation's first large-scale aluminum can recycling program. They offered a penny for every can returned to their distributors. They didn't just invent the modern beer can. The program was a pioneering corporate initiative that significantly promoted recycling to the American public. By the end of the 1950s, the Coors family was at the absolute apex of their power and influence. They were unimaginably wealthy, respected as innovators, and stewards of one of America's most beloved brands. They lived a life of secluded privilege in and around a sprawling 800-acre family compound near Golden, a self-contained world protected by gates and guards. But their immense fortune and high public profile also made them a target. The family had already had a terrifying brush with the dark side of fame, an incident that served as a chilling omen of what was to come. February 9th, 1960. It was a cold, crisp Tuesday morning in the foothills of Morrison, Colorado. Adolph "Ad" Coors III, the 44-year-old chairman of the board and the undisputed heir to the Coors brewing empire, climbed into his green and white station wagon. He was a man of impeccable routine. Every morning he left his secluded ranch for the short, scenic drive to the brewery in Golden. He was a devoted husband to his wife Mary and a doting father to their 4 children. Unlike some of his more aggressive relatives, Ad was known for his gentle nature, his kindness, and his quiet, dignified demeanor. He was, by all accounts, a good man, a respected community figure, the kind of leader who inspired loyalty and affection. He was the beloved future of the Coors Dynasty. He never made it to work. Later that morning, a milk delivery man on his route noticed something strange. Coors' station wagon was stopped sideways on the narrow Turkey Creek Bridge, its engine still running and the radio playing softly. The scene was eerily quiet, the driver nowhere in sight. The milkman alerted the authorities. When the police and members of the Coors family arrived, a sense of dread washed over them. A search of the vehicle and the surrounding area revealed Ad's hat, a pair of his glasses, and a small bloody penknife on the ground. The initial hope was that it had been a car accident, that perhaps he had hit his head and wandered off in a daze. But in the back of their minds, the family felt the cold grip of an old familiar fear. Their nightmare, the one that had haunted them since the foiled plot of 1933, was coming true. For 2 agonizing days, there was nothing but silence and speculation. The family waited by the phone, their sprawling estate transformed into a command center for law enforcement. The FBI was called in. recognizing immediately that this was likely a kidnapping that crossed state lines. Then on February 11th, a ransom note arrived at the Coors home. It was addressed to Mary Coors, typed on a simple piece of paper and composed with chilling, detached precision. It demanded $500,000 for Ad's safe return, the equivalent of nearly $5 million today. The instructions were a convoluted cat-and-mouse game, a series of complex directions designed to thwart any police surveillance. The family was to await further instructions via a series of classified ads and radio messages. The note was signed simply, "The Mastermind." The Coors family immediately agreed to pay. Their only concern was getting Ad back alive. They pleaded with the kidnapper through the media, assuring him they would cooperate fully. The case was now the biggest news story in America. The FBI, under the personal direction of the legendary J. Edgar Hoover, poured massive resources into the investigation, launching one of the most extensive and high-profile manhunts in the Bureau's history. The nation watched, transfixed and horrified, as one of its most prominent industrial families was plunged into a terrifying public ordeal. The gilded cage had been shattered. The arrival of the ransom note transformed the Coors family's agonizing uncertainty into a focused, high-stakes crisis. The sprawling family estate in Golden, normally a sanctuary of secluded privilege, became the nerve center of a massive FBI operation. Agents set up a command post inside the main house, installing direct phone lines and sophisticated listening equipment. The family's every move was now coordinated with law enforcement. J. Edgar Hoover, the formidable and autocratic director of the FBI, took a personal and obsessive interest in the case. The kidnapping of an heir to a great American fortune was an affront to his sense of order, and he unleashed the full might of his bureau to solve it. The investigation began with the note itself. In the sterile quiet of the FBI's forensic laboratory in Washington, D.C., the single piece of paper was subjected to an unprecedented level of scrutiny. Experts determined it had been typed on a 1952 Royal Portable typewriter with an elite typeface, a specific and relatively uncommon model. The paper was an unusual, high rag content bond, and they were able to trace its manufacture to a specific mill. The language of the note was cold, precise, and devoid of emotion, suggesting an intelligent and methodical author. Yet the convoluted instructions hinted at a criminal novice, someone who had perhaps overplanned the crime on paper but lacked the practical experience to execute it. For the Coors family, these were days of unbearable tension. Mary Coors, Ad's wife, became the designated point of contact, her life reduced to waiting by a silent telephone. The family, following the FBI's guidance, attempted to comply with the kidnappers' bizarre instructions. They placed cryptic classified ads in the Denver Post, waiting for a response that never came. They monitored radio frequencies for coded messages that were never broadcast. Days turned into a week, then two. The kidnapper, this self-proclaimed mastermind, had vanished. The communication lines went dead. A terrifying possibility began to dawn on the investigators and the family. Something had gone terribly wrong. The silence was not a sign of a patient criminal waiting for the perfect moment. It was the silence of failure, of panic, and very likely of death. While the Coors family waited in a state of suspended grief, the FBI was piecing together a profile of their phantom adversary. And as they dug deeper, they unearthed the story of a man whose life was a bizarre and chilling paradox of brilliance and brutality. His name was Joseph Corbett Jr. Joseph Corbett Jr. was not a common thug. Born in Seattle, he was by all accounts a highly intelligent and gifted youth. He was a superior student, a voracious reader, and in 1950, he earned a Fulbright Scholar with a bachelor's degree in chemistry and had pursued graduate studies, placing him among the country's elite academic class. He was on a path to a life in academia, a world of research and respectability. But beneath the scholarly exterior lurked a volatile and violent impulse. In 1951, that impulse exploded. While on a trip in California, Corbett picked up a hitchhiker, an Air Force sergeant named Dwayne W. Kidder. An argument ensued, and Corbett, in a fit of rage, shot and killed him. He was arrested, convicted of second-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison. The brilliant scholar was now a convicted killer, inmate number 71,131 at California's San Quentin prison. In prison, he was a model inmate, quiet, compliant, and intelligent. His good behavior earned him a transfer to a minimum security facility. It was a foolish mistake on the part of the prison authorities. In 1955, Joseph Corbett Jr. simply walked away from the prison and vanished. For the next 5 years, he lived as a fugitive ghost, drifting across the country using aliases, working odd jobs, and staying one step ahead of the law. Sometime in 1959, this fugitive with a genius IQ and a history of violence arrived in Denver, Colorado, and he began to plan a crime that he believed would solve all his problems. A meticulously researched, high-stakes kidnapping. He was patient. He rented a small apartment and took a job at a trucking company. He spent his free time in the library studying the lives of Denver's wealthiest families. He settled on the Coors Dynasty. He began to stalk Adolph Coors III, discreetly learning his routines, mapping his daily drive from his ranch to the brewery. He bought a 1951 Pontiac sedan under an alias, paying in cash. He assembled a kidnapping kit, including ropes, tape, and a handgun. He was no longer the panicked killer who had murdered a hitchhiker. He was a methodical predator, calmly preparing to strike. For months, the FBI investigation seemed to be going nowhere. The publicity surrounding the case was immense, with Ad Coors' face on the cover of magazines and in newspapers across the country. Hoover authorized one of the largest leaflet campaigns in FBI history, printing and distributing over 1.5 million flyers with information about the case and the distinctive typewriter font from the ransom note. Still, nothing. Then in August 1960, 6 months after the kidnapping, the investigation got its first major break. A man scavenging in a remote dump near Atlantic City, New Jersey, stumbled upon the charred, burned-out shell of a 1951 Pontiac. He reported it to the local police. When FBI agents arrived, they painstakingly searched the wreckage. They managed to recover a vehicle identification number from the scorched frame. Tracing the number, they made a stunning discovery. The car had been registered to a man named Walter Osborne, an alias. Digging deeper, they found that the real owner, the man who had bought the car in Denver the previous year, was the fugitive Joseph Corbett Jr. Suddenly, the massive, faceless investigation had a name and a target. The net began to close with astonishing speed. Investigators discovered that Corbett had owned a 1952 Royal Portable typewriter, the exact model used to type the ransom note. They learned he had worked for a time in Denver for the very same trucking company whose distinctive yellow trucks passed by the Coors Brewery every day. The ghost was becoming a man, and the evidence was mounting. The manhunt for Joseph Corbett Jr. intensified, becoming the FBI's #1 priority. While the FBI was hunting Corbett, the fate of Ad Coors remained a heartbreaking mystery. The family, though their hope was fading, still held out for a miracle. They continued to cooperate with the FBI, praying for a breakthrough, a phone call, anything. The breakthrough came, but it was not the one they had prayed for. On September 11, 1960, a young hiker and his father were exploring a remote, heavily wooded area in Pike National Forest, about 40 miles south of Denver. Deep in the woods, the young man noticed something out of place, a faded plaid shirt lying on the ground. Nearby, he found a pair of trousers and, strangely, a child's toy holster. Recognizing that the items could be connected to the famous kidnapping case, they immediately contacted the authorities. The discovery triggered a massive ground search. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, forest rangers, and civilian volunteers formed human chains and began to painstakingly comb the rugged mountainous terrain. For several days, they found nothing. Then on September 15th, a searcher digging through a patch of loose soil made a grim discovery. It was a human skull. It had a small, distinct bullet hole in the back. A little further on, they found more remains. The remains were rushed to a local hospital where the family's dentist was waiting. A quick comparison of dental records confirmed the family's worst fears and shattered their last sliver of hope. It was Adolph Coors III. The 7-month search was over. The subsequent autopsy painted a clear and brutal picture of Ad's final moments. He had been shot twice in the back with a .38 caliber pistol. The forensic evidence strongly suggested that he had been killed on the day of his abduction, February 9th. The struggle had likely taken place right there on the Turkey Creek Bridge. Ad Coors, a man known for his gentle nature, had evidently fought back against his attacker. In the ensuing panic, Corbett had shot and killed him. The entire 7-month ordeal, the ransom note, the elaborate instructions, the family's agonizing wait, had been a charade. Ad Coors was gone from the very beginning. Corbett had been trying to extort money for a man he had already murdered. The news was a devastating, soul-crushing blow to the Coors family and the entire community that had been holding its breath alongside them. The case was now a murder investigation, and the hunt for Joseph Corbett Jr. became even more urgent and intense. He was no longer just a kidnapper, he was a wanted killer. The FBI tracked his movements across the continent. He had fled to Canada, living in cheap rooming houses in Toronto and working odd jobs under an alias. He was a lone wolf, careful and elusive. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, joined the hunt, turning up the heat. Corbett eventually made his way to Vancouver and then to Winnipeg. He was running out of places to hide. In October 1960, his face, now plastered on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, appeared in a magazine article that was read by an acquaintance in Canada. Another tip came from someone who recognized him from a television show about the FBI's most wanted. The tips led the RCMP and the FBI to a squalid rooming house in a run-down part of Winnipeg. On October 29, 1960, heavily armed officers surrounded the building. They stormed his room and captured Joseph Corbett Jr. without a fight. He was found with a stash of weapons and cash. The mastermind was finally in custody. Extradited back to Colorado, his trial in the spring of 1961 was a national media sensation. Held in the small town of Golden, the trial drew reporters from all over the country. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Martin Miller, built a mountain of circumstantial but compelling evidence. The typewriter, the car, witness testimony placing Corbett in the area, and the fact that he had fled immediately after the murder. Corbett, for his part, remained eerily calm and detached throughout the proceedings. He maintained his innocence, his defense arguing that he was a victim of a massive frame-up, a convenient scapegoat for the FBI. He never took the stand. The jury was unconvinced by his claims. After a lengthy trial, they found Joseph Corbett Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But for the Coors family, the verdict brought no relief, no closure. Their beloved Ad was gone forever, stolen from them in a senseless act of violence. The trial was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. The family, shattered and terrified, retreated even deeper into their fortress of wealth and privacy. The murder of their heir would become a defining trauma, a wound that would fester for decades, profoundly reshaping the dynasty and hardening the hearts of the surviving brothers, setting them on a new and aggressive path to defend the world as they saw it. The conviction of Joseph Corbett Jr. closed a chapter in the legal history of the Coors kidnapping. But for the family, the story was far from over. The murder of Adolph Coors III was a trauma that fundamentally and irrevocably altered the dynasty's DNA. The world, which had once been a landscape of boundless opportunity for their ambitious family, now seemed a dark and menacing place, filled with chaotic forces that could strike at any moment. For the surviving brothers, particularly the intensely ideological Joe and the scientifically minded Bill, Ad's murder was not just the random act of a lone disturbed criminal. They saw it as a profound symptom of a deeper sickness in American society, a creeping moral decay, a breakdown of law and order, and a permissive liberalism that, in their minds, fostered an environment where criminals like Corbett could thrive. Their grief curdled into a cold, fierce anger. Their fear solidified into a political crusade. The trauma of 1960 radicalized them, transforming them from merely conservative businessmen into militant ideologues. Their new, undeclared mission would extend far beyond the walls of their brewery. They possessed an immense fortune, and they would now wield it as a weapon in a war for the very soul of America. They would not just sell beer, they would attempt to remake the nation in their own rigid, conservative image, a crusade that would bring them to the heights of political power while simultaneously engulfing their company in decades of controversy and protest. Joe Coors, the sharp-minded and aggressive strategist, became the primary architect of the family's political war. He was not content to simply write checks to Republican candidates. He wanted to build the intellectual arsenal of the conservative movement from the ground up. He looked at the political landscape of the late 1960s and early 1970s and saw that the left dominated the institutions that shaped public opinion, the universities, the national media, and the powerful policy-shaping foundations, like the Ford and Rockefeller foundations. The right, he believed, was losing the war of ideas. In 1973, Joe Coors made his most significant and lasting move. Along with a fiery conservative activist named Paul Weyrich, he provided the crucial seed money, $250,000 from his own pocket, to establish a new kind of think tank in Washington, D.C. They called it the Heritage Foundation. Unlike the older, more staid and academic conservative organizations, Heritage was designed to be a fast-moving, aggressive political weapon. Its revolutionary mission was to produce concise, timely, and easily digestible policy papers that could be delivered directly to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, influencing legislation and public debate in real time. It was a brilliant strategy, and with Joe Coors' vast financial backing and unwavering ideological support, it became astonishingly successful. The Heritage Foundation grew into one of the most powerful and influential conservative organizations in the world, the intellectual engine that would draft the policy blueprint for the Reagan Revolution of the 1980s. Joe's influence became deeply personal. He was an early and ardent supporter of Ronald Reagan, the charismatic governor of California who was eyeing the presidency. He became a key member of Reagan's kitchen cabinet, an informal group of wealthy, powerful, and deeply conservative businessmen who served as the governor's most trusted advisors. When Reagan was elected president in 1980, Joe Coors had a direct line to the White House. He was more than a donor. He was an ideological partner, a true believer who had the ear of the most powerful man in the world. He and his brother Bill used their fortune to support a vast network of right-wing causes, from anti-communist organizations and pro-free market groups to campaigns against environmental regulations and, most controversially, against the burgeoning movements for civil rights, women's liberation, and gay rights. But this fervent political activism came at a steep price for the family business. As the Coors brothers became more visible as right-wing titans, their company and its famous beer became a lightning rod for protest. The Coors family's relationship with organized labor had always been hostile. They ran their brewery with an iron fist, viewing unions as a socialist threat to their authority. They notoriously required prospective employees to take lie detector tests, where they were asked intrusive questions about their political beliefs, their personal lives, and, crucially, any sympathies for labor unions. This led to years of bitter labor disputes, but it all came to a head in 1977. After contract negotiations broke down, 1,500 union workers at the Golden Brewery went on strike. The company's response was swift and brutal. They broke the strike by hiring replacement workers, and in 1978, after a bitter year-long standoff, workers voted to decertify the union. In response, the AFL-CIO, the largest federation of unions in the United States, launched a massive nationwide boycott of Coors beer. Don't Buy Coors became a powerful rallying cry for the American labor movement for the next decade. Soon, other disaffected groups joined the cause, transforming the labor dispute into a full-blown culture war. Chicano activists, led by the American GI Forum, had been boycotting Coors for years over what they alleged were discriminatory hiring practices against Mexican Americans. They pointed to the insultingly small number of Latinos employed at the brewery despite the large Hispanic population in Colorado. Black civil rights groups, including the NAACP, joined in, citing similar accusations and the family's well-documented financial support for politicians who consistently voted against civil rights legislation. The Coors family, they argued, was using the profits from their beer to actively undermine the progress of minority communities. The LGBTQ plus community also became a powerful and highly effective force in the boycott movement. Gay rights activists, particularly in progressive hubs like San Francisco, targeted Coors due to the family's generous funding of staunchly anti-gay politicians, like California State Senator John Briggs, who sponsored an initiative to ban gay people from teaching in public schools. The company's intrusive lie detector tests, which reportedly included questions about sexual orientation, were seen as a direct and hateful attack on their community. The boycott became a symbol of solidarity and resistance, with gay bars across the country proudly refusing to serve Coors. The late Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay elected officials in the U.S., was a prominent and vocal leader of the powerful San Francisco boycott. The controversies reached a shocking crescendo in 1984, thanks to an astonishingly tone-deaf and offensive speech given by Bill Coors. Speaking to a group of minority business owners in Denver, the then 70-year-old chairman attempted to lecture them on the obstacles to their success. Lack the intellectual capacity to succeed, But one of the best things slave traders did was to drag your ancestors over here in chains. He went on to say that the problems plaguing the continent of Africa were due to a lack of intellectual capacity. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. The comments made national news. Civil rights leaders expressed their profound outrage, and the NAACP immediately reinstated its national boycott. Bill Coors was forced to issue a humiliating public apology, but the damage was done. The speech seemed to confirm the worst accusations leveled against the family for years, that behind the carefully crafted image of an all-American brand lay a deep-seated and ugly prejudice. Amidst this public firestorm, the family continued to be stalked by personal tragedy, feeding the narrative of a Coors curse. Adolph Coors IV, the son of the murdered heir, was a man haunted by his father's death and uncomfortable with the hardline politics of his uncles. In the 1970s, he survived a horrific near-fatal car accident. The experience, he later said, led to a profound spiritual awakening. He became a born-again Christian, and in a move that stunned the family, began to publicly distance himself from the company's political stances. He even became an outspoken critic of his uncle's anti-union policies, a stunning act of internal rebellion. He eventually left the family business altogether, choosing a path of faith and philanthropy, a quiet but firm rejection of the world of power and ideological warfare that had consumed his family. By the late 1980s and 90s, the decades of controversy had taken their toll. The boycotts had significantly damaged the brand's reputation, and the national expansion had put them in a brutal competition with giants like Anheuser-Busch and Miller. The Coors mystique was gone, and their market share was eroding. The fourth generation of the family, led by the more moderate Pete Coors, realized that to survive in a new era of globalization, the company had to change. In 2005, that change came in a monumental way. The Adolph Coors Company announced a merger of equals with Canada's oldest brewer, Molson Incorporated. The move created the Molson Coors Brewing Company, a multinational giant. For the Coors family, it was a pragmatic business decision, but it also marked the symbolic end of their empire. The company was no longer solely theirs. While they retained significant ownership and influence, they had ceded absolute control. In 2005, the merged Molson Coors had dual headquarters in Denver and Montreal. Years later, in 2020, the U.S. base officially moved to Chicago. Even in this modern era, the echoes of the past remain. The Adolph Coors Foundation, still controlled by the family, continues to be a major financial engine for conservative and libertarian causes, and the specter of violence has not been fully exorcised. In February 2020, 60 years almost to the month after the murder of Adolph Coors III, a disgruntled employee at the Molson Coors complex in Milwaukee opened fire on his coworkers, killing 5 of them before taking his own life. It was a horrifying modern tragedy, a devastating echo of the violence and labor tensions that have shadowed the company for so long. So when all is said and done, what is the final story of the Coors dynasty? It's a tale of profound and startling contradictions. On one hand, it is the quintessential American success story. A penniless orphan builds an empire through grit, genius, and a fanatical devotion to quality. The Coors name stands for genuine, industry-changing innovation. But on the other hand, it's a cautionary tale of how unimaginable success and unimaginable tragedy can forge a rigid, reactionary worldview. It's a story of a family that used its vast fortune to wage a culture war, shaping the course of American politics while alienating millions of the very people they hoped would buy their beer. The curse of the Coors family was never about ghosts or supernatural forces. It was a very human curse, born from the trauma of violence and the paranoia that immense wealth can breed. It was the curse of an ideology so unbending that it blinded them to the changing world around them. The curse of a family that built a fortress to protect itself from the world, only to find itself isolated and besieged. Theirs is a story of a golden empire built on the purest mountain water, but forever shadowed by the dark, complex, and deeply human mark left by its founders. It reminds us that behind every great fortune lies a story, and sometimes that story is as bitter as it is sweet.